As I was saying yesterday, we have moved beyond, there's this approaching existential threat to our democracy. Well, the worst that could happen on a certain level has already occurred. The demolition that has gone on, the demolition in terms of the efficacy of federal agencies, as exemplified by what happened in Mystic, Texas, at this camp, where 50 people are known dead because of these flash floods. Now, one of the things that those who perpetrated this madness are going to be saying, they're saying it now about this, they'll be saying it as we go along. All of these tragedies that we know could have been averted with proper governmental functioning, or at least ameliorated, their effects diminished. These people will say, well, it would have happened anyway. But that's not true of this flash flood and the horrifying devastation of what's going on there. The cuts that DOGE introduced in this particular case to the National Weather Service. There are all kinds of weather experts, hydrologists, predictors, people who are professionals who have studied these things educationally and experientially for decades. Their jobs have been cut. This was true in San Antonio. This was true in San Angelo. I was reading just the other day before this happened about how they're taking away the position that has to do with predicting hurricanes. Can you believe this stuff? No, we can't control whether or not a hurricane is happening, but it is part of the proper functioning of government, in this case, the National Weather Service. We all see it on TV when they say the hurricane will hit at such and such a time. These are weather experts. Now, what did DOGE do? Well, Elon Musk told his merry band of young techno nerds, if you see something that looks dumb, just cut it. Those were his words. If it looks dumb, get rid of it. How would these young guys, and by the way, the fact that they were young, signers of the Declaration of Independence were young. This is not about they were young, therefore they could not know. It's that they didn't know anything about the function of these agencies, therefore they didn't know. And that applies, by the way, to Elon Musk. So he says get rid of dumb positions. So they don't know about the intricacies of weather prediction, the intricacy of what the weather service does. And so they just got rid of all these people. So the Texans, which should have been forewarned that this wasn't going to be just a storm. I grew up in Houston, Texas. I know that, these terrible thunderstorms occur, but you rely on the functioning of government to give you proper warnings and to give you the proper information that you need in order to protect yourself and to protect your family. Now, this is all part of a larger conversation. First of all, the larger conversation, as I said, in that, what just occurred, where we see the effects of these horrifying demolition procedures on the part of DOGE in the Weather Service, but it applies to so many of our federal agencies. You're already seeing about Social Security, where the diminished resources given to the proper functioning of Social Security, so that older people who live on their Social Security checks, who need those checks. And, for 80 years, those checks came on time. Well, now, they go into the website to get information and make a call to get information, and there are simply not enough people there to be handling all the demand. Once again, let me stress, that demand, in the cases of many, many people, has to do with whether or not they will be able to pay their rent and so forth. All the way down the line, this just destructiveness, all in the name, of course, of getting rid of waste and fraud and abuse. It's time for us to be very clear within our minds about what efficiency in government means. For years, people have been talking about government should be run like a business. Well, first of all, this is hardly running things like a business for a bunch of techno nerds to come in 1 week, just start cutting things, who don't even know what these positions are about. No responsible CEO would do that. No proper management system would allow for that. So it's not like they're running these things like a proper business. But even that, take that further. Government is not a business. Some huge corporation, the bottom line has got to be profit, and rightfully so. There should still, of course, be ethical considerations, which too often there's not these days. But that's a slightly different conversation. The government is not that. You don't feed a child because it's going to make money. You don't provide education for your children because it's going to make money. You don't warn people about weather disasters because it's going to make money. You do those things because the purpose of government is to secure, once again, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. One of my favorite lines from Franklin Roosevelt is, "A necessitous man is not a free man." People who are bound up without the information we need, without the resources that we need just to live a dignified life in the richest country in the world in a very real way, are not free. Now, we all have heard about what's going on with Medicaid. 17 million people who are going to be losing at least a large section of their health care. There will be people who will be ill. There are people who will die. There are people already dying from some of these cuts at USAID. Humanitarian efforts, medical efforts that we were providing. And once again, everybody use your mind on this one, because a lot of the void that we are now creating in terms of soft power will be taken up, and already is, by China. There are so many instances that we can talk about. The brain drain by sending these immigrants back, the horrifying, obviously, what's going on in the streets, the goons, really, who are terrorizing and traumatizing so many Americans. But you and I have to think very deeply, because the problem with American politics over the last few decades is that it is very shallow, and people only address symptoms. They're addressing symptoms rather than cause. They're addressing short-term fixes rather than long-term solutions. Often those short-term fixes, in many ways, unduly influenced by corporate donorship. And anybody who have thought to even talk about those things, well, that's not serious. The people who have been guiding these conversations are not serious. They were not the grown-ups in the room that they purported to be. Other conversation. Right now, in terms of this big, bad, ugly, horrifying, inhumane bill that's passed, we've got to talk about the Democrats too. I have seen senators and congresspeople who are laying it down and kicking ass, and I'm very impressed. Governors, senators, congresspeople, they're great at opposing Donald Trump. But I must say, where the hell have you been for the last few decades, guys? Because even now, they're saying, well, this big, beautiful bill was passed so that they could pass a tax cut for billionaires. See, this is the problem. The Republicans, for quite a while now, there have been some big lies. The Democrats, though, would tell the truth, but not the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I'm telling you the whole truth. The whole truth is that this is not about passing a tax cut. This is about permanentizing a tax cut. Big difference. Permanentizing a tax cut that was passed in 2017, that was signature item in Donald Trump's first term, 83 cents of every dollar going to the top corporations and richest Americans. It's a huge, huge support for the very rich people to get even richer, and it increases income inequality. I'm sorry. When Biden won, for 2 years, he had a House and he had a Senate that were both Democratic. I did not hear these people say a peep about repealing that tax cut when they had the chance. This is not just passing a tax cut. This is permanentizing a tax cut. The Democrats had a chance to repeal. Now, why? Because some of their own donors were involved. You could carve out pieces. Some of it were, by the way, when this tax cut was passed, I tell you, Donald Trump's very shrewd. What the Republican, and when I say the Republicans, I mean this current iteration of the Republican Party. It's not the Republican Party I grew up with, or the Democratic Party that I grew up with in some cases. Okay. They'll steal a loaf from people, but they throw some crumbs. So what they did in 2017 with that tax cut, yes, huge boon to the very, very, very richest, but it did do a few things for the middle class that were things that the Democrats should have done under Obama. But when Biden came in, they could have repealed that tax cut, repealed the egregious aspects of it, and then put back in the middle class tax cuts. So we need some radical truth telling, because I'll tell you why. This horrible chapter is going to be over because we say so. But if all we're doing is saying, we'll win the House back in 2006, we'll win the presidency in 2028, yes, we must, that is not enough. That is not enough, because those are just what's happening as a symptom. There's a huge, huge forces behind all that. That if you just win the House back in 2026, they'll be just lying in wait for 28. We have to have a deep conversation about what's going on in America, a deep conversation about what has actually gone wrong, a deep recommitment to our country, to the democratic and humanitarian values that should be our bottom line as opposed to corporate profits. And this whole demolition process that Peter Thiel is behind, that Elon Musk is behind, that the Christian nationalists are behind, that Curtis Yarvin is behind. Curtis Yarvin says democracy is not a good idea. He is deeply influential. He has said we should get over our fear of dictators because we should have a corporate dictatorship. Donald Trump is just the tip of the spear. We have to think for ourselves, and we need to imagine. You know, Werner Erhard said you can live your life one of two ways, either according to your circumstances or according to a vision. We have to deal with the circumstances, there's no doubt about it. But we have to have a vision of what we want on the other side of this. That's what we need, and we need to stop buying into all the ways that people who even have those deeper conversations are peripheralized. No more. That's what got us here. Imagine the America that you want. Imagine the world that you want. Because this big, beautiful bill, it's going to increase support for fossil fuel extraction and withhold support for clean energy. What happened in Mystic, Texas, we're just at the beginning of these horrors. We've got to toughen up. We need spines. We need critical thinking. Don't let other people do your thinking for you. Consider all this. We need to rise to be the people we need to be to handle things from here. We will. Thanks.